So you want to play like the FNCS champions, Merstach and Malibuca. Then you clicked on the right video because I watched all 12 of their FNCS Grand Finals game, and from them I learned how to play off spawn, find Storm Surge, dominate endgames, and much more, so let's get right into their strategies. Merstach and Malibuca land at the south half of Fencing Field in all 12 of their games. They were triple contested here, but they never actually fought the teams here beyond getting Storm Surge. Once they had looted a little bit of their split, Malibuca would start to kill Nisha, who drops the medallion, as well as a Mythic Striker AR. Merstach would take the Mythic AR as he is absolutely dirty with it, and they would switch off between who has the medallion based on whoever needed it more. From here, they would loot the vault, and Merstach would always use his extra gold to use the mod bench. Merstach is a disgusting sniper, and he consistently would use the Hollow 13 optic scope to hit these shots. Although fighting isn't that important in a grand final setting, this team was still excellent at it. When taking fights, they would constantly create perfect pinches, and in game 2 while fighting Andalex and Seidu, they set up this fight so that one player is pressuring from the top and one player is pressuring from the sidewall. This is the best way to aggressively pressure a duo because you have one player on the top, it doesn't allow the other team to turn the fight into a build fight, and it means that the defensive team has to block both angles from both horizontal and vertical directions. Just watch this fight from Andalex and Seidu's POV and see how hard it is to keep this fight under control. These splits allow for incredibly easy fights, but you need to make sure that you are establishing a lot of counter piece control because if you don't, you can easily be picked off as a solo. They didn't take many more fights throughout their 12 games, but they did a great job of creating opportunities to potentially get good fight openings. In game 4, Malibuca gets pushed while he is separated from his teammate, and he uses a ton of materials to safely turf back to Merstach. As a result, the aggressing team doesn't want to take an even 2v2, so they disengage from the fight. While they are doing this, Merstach pops up and goes for some shots for both Storm Surge and to potentially find enough damage to commit to the fight. In game 11, Malibuca and Merstach start to sneak up onto Diox and Kate. Instead of just trying to wait for them to open up their edit so that they can get shot at, Malibuca literally just starts to run out in the open begging to get shot. This baits Diox and Kate to shoot at him, which then gives Merstach an opening to get an easy headshot snipe to open up the fight. These are the strategies they use to fight, but how do they find their Storm Surge? Getting Storm Surge is one of the most important aspects of high-level Fortnite lobbies. Malibuca and Merstach start off getting their Storm Surge by making large bases in their POI. This is useful because they can remember where all the extra heals are in their own drop spot. As a result, they can then take trade shots with the teams around them. After being hit on these trade shots, they can use their medallion and their extra heals to get Storm Surge while losing 0 healing items. They do a very similar strategy when cash spawns in the third zone. They heavily prioritize their cash for both the 400 metal, but more importantly for the extra heals. With these extra heals, they would trade shots with the teams around them because they knew it didn't matter if they got shot back as they could go right back to their cash base and heal up. Moving later into the game in the 5th zone, they constantly try to play off the edge of the 5th zone. This is because of where they ideally want to be in any given 6th zone. If you haven't played a lot of high-level Fortnite lobbies, you might think that pulling the exact center of the 6th zone is a great zone, but when you need a ton of Storm Surge damage, it becomes almost impossible to find this damage as you are far away from anyone who has to move. By playing off the edge of the 5th zone, you make it impossible to pull the center zone. Instead, if you get the zone, you will be on the edge of the zone, and therefore you will have great sightlines onto the players around you who need to rotate out of their boxes. Playing off the edge of the 5th zone also means that if the 6th zone plays max distance, you have a shorter rotation. If the zone plays max distance, you will also be in a position to stagger and spray the players who are forced to rotate before you because the zone is on their back. This is the core of how they found Surge, but they also had some other good tricks to find their Storm Surge. In game 1, Malibuca gets some tags onto another team, and he then runs to where he thinks they will run out of to try and get some more Storm Surge. Unfortunately, this team backed off and didn't rotate to where Malibuca predicted, but it shows how this team thinks as they're constantly predicting where teams will be going and how they can use that to get more Storm Surge. Storm Surge is hard for even the best teams in the world, and in game 10, they found themselves struggling throughout the game for Surge. In game 11, they noticeably adapted to their game 10 struggles, and they were significantly more aggressive for Storm Surge. This small adaptation shows that they are incredibly flexible as a team and aren't locked into a rigid plan. This is almost a necessity to play at the top level as teams are constantly changing their strategies, meaning that you need to be constantly adapting yours. Now that we have gotten through the early and mid game, let's move on to how they dominate the end game. In the endgame, they almost always try to either use crash pads or grapples to get to the front side low ground of the first moving. From here, they would usually play on the lower layers or the complete low ground. They would also create simple rotates for themselves by using the expanding and dead sides of the moving zones. The dead side of the zone is created because people don't want to rotate into the deepest part of the moving zone before it. This means that if the zone plays, let's just say this direction, this side of the zone will be the dead side because there weren't any players there in the previous zone. The expanding side of the zone is the side of the zone that is opening up. It is most obvious to see when the zone moves diagonally from where it came, because if the zone is moving this way, then this side needs to collapse in and this side needs to expand out in order for the zone to get where it needs to go. If you play into the expanding side of the zone, there are rarely players here, which results in a safer rotation. It is easy for me to explain these concepts where I can break them down and use drones to get better vision on the zone, but being able to read these zones like this is incredibly difficult to do during the chaos of an endgame and takes a really high level of understanding to be able to actually use consistently, which makes Malibuca's use of it even more impressive. Now that we've looked at how they play the low ground, let's move up to the high ground. This team isn't necessarily known for their height play, but that doesn't mean they aren't incredibly strong from the high ground as well. When they play for the high ground, they don't try to overcomplicate it. For example, in game 5, they just look up at the high ground, realized it would be easy to shoot out, and then they take height and end up getting second. There wasn't anything too complicated about this other than the fact that they looked for the play. Too often, people are distracted by all of the other chaos in the endgame that they miss these easy opportunities that come if you just pause for a second and actually take note of what's happening in the endgame around you. In game 7, they do a similar play where they shoot out the high ground and then immediately play medkits in the zone. The goal of this play was to get a different team to fight the height team. If this happened, both teams would have been scuffed, meaning that Merstach and Malibuca could come right in and take an easy high ground. Unfortunately, this play didn't work because height didn't get fought, but it shows how important simply looking at the high ground is to taking it, because so many teams completely tunnel vision on the rest of the game. Now that we've looked at the low ground and the high ground, let's look at how they find refreshes in the endgame. When trying to find refreshes in the endgame, this team is constantly looking for ways they can create or find advantages on weaker players. In game 4, they do this by using their audio cues to hear only one player spraying on their leg. As a result, they know it is highly likely this player is a solo. Off this information, they push in with pre-edits and get an easy kill by just 2v1 aim dueling this player. Being a solo is a disadvantage that Merstach and Malibuca can capitalize on, but they can also capitalize on players who still have to rotate. In the 9th zone, they would tarp the last part of the zone early. As a result, they would have a lot of time to just wait around. Instead of looking in the zone for refreshes on players who are already in the zone, they would instead drop back into the tarp where they could find players who are still moving and therefore easier to eliminate. These are all the things that allowed them to win an FNCS, but I also want to point out a few of the mistakes that they made, because although they won an FNCS, they didn't play perfectly. And before I get to this section, I want to make it very clear that I can both deeply respect how Merstach and Malibuca play and also find flaws in their gameplay, because I got some comments in the video where I was critical of Mongrel and Mr. Savage, saying that I shouldn't be giving them advice because they are more successful than me, which is a true statement but misses the point that I'm trying to get the deepest understanding of Fortnite that I possibly can, and if I pretend that everything that a player does is right, even if it leads to their death, would lead to a stagnation of innovation within Fortnite. In game 1, they are playing on the low ground and the zone plays up a hill, and they don't elevate up the hill and instead allow other teams to block them off. This could have been easily avoided if they had just expanded into more space earlier, so that when they needed to rotate, they were not forced to take a shambles low ground path that resulted in their death. In game 3, their mistake was really small, but it cost them the game, because when they got into the zone, they only made one box that was half in the zone and half out of the zone. As a result, this made them an easy target to get lobby focused, and they went down when they could have avoided this by just making sure that they had one full box in the zone. In game 4, Malibuca and Merstach are on the second low ground in the middle of the zone. They look to tarp forward, and they make the mistake of tarping down the center of the zone on top of the low ground team. They should have gone to either the right or the left here and tarp to make sure that Merstach doesn't get sprayed down into the low ground team's box, but I do gotta say this is one of the most impressive shots I've seen in a minute to even kill one of the players from Merstach's perspective. Finally, in game 9, Malibuca is a solo and he is in a low material situation in the final moving zone. He makes the mistake of playing too aggressive for a refresh when he still had medkits that he could play in the zone. He could have easily gotten an extra 15 points from this game if instead of spraying someone and getting awareness checked, if he instead played his medkits and used his resources with complete awareness. This is how you can play like Merstach and Malibuca, and if you enjoyed this video, I think you'll also enjoy this video on screen as well. Peace.